Okay, hi. I'm going to go through the indices revision and just make sure that we all know what we're doing. So I think it starts off okay, but we'll just go through them all anyway. If you found the first few questions easy, feel free to skip through until I get to some of the harder ones. So when we're multiplying, I'm just going to multiply the numbers. So 4 times 3 is 12. And then I'm going to add together my powers. Remember, that's the rule. So there's 5 C's here and 3 C's here. So altogether I have 8 C's. And then there are just 2 R's. So that's all I had to do. So for the second one, I'm going to start by rewriting it as a fraction because I think it makes it a little bit easier to see. D cubed m4. And then I'm just going to do my division. So 25 and 10, I can divide both of those things by 5. So I end up with 5 on the top and I end up with 2 on the bottom. Now I can automatically put down my m because there's no other m to do anything with. So it's allowed to just sit there. But my d's, remember the rule when you're dividing is to subtract. So if I've got 7 on top and 3 down the bottom, 7 minus 3 is 4. All right, for the second one, same thing. I'm just going to rewrite it as a fraction because it's easier to see. 20x squared divided by 8x to the power of 9, z. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. What can I divide both top and bottom by? I can divide them both by 4. Now, if you said you can divide them both by 2, you're right, but you haven't simplified it as much as possible, so that wouldn't be a final solution. So this number is going to be -4, and this number here is going to be 2. All right, so then I'm going to subtract my powers. Then I'm going to, wait, I just said I was dividing by 4. Oh my goodness, this is a 5. Oh, look at me, making mistakes already. I'm dividing by 4 to get to 5. Okay. So then I'm going to subtract my powers. So 2 minus 9 is -7. So because it's -7, I can't write it up the top. So x to the power of 7 belongs on the bottom. And then there was nothing to match the z, so that just sits there. And let's just make sure we can tell that that's a 5. Okay, so the next one, remember when you've got to the power of a third like this, we need to turn this into a square root. Although not a square root in this case, a cubed root, because the bottom number is 3. So whatever the top number is, it stays with the number, but whatever the bottom of the fraction is, that's the one that comes outside of the little root symbol. So I want to take the third root, or the cubed root of 8, and you should know that that's just 2, because 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. Okay, so remember negative powers mean that the number is in the wrong place. It should be on the bottom of a fraction. So it should be 1 over 9 squared, and 9 squared is 81. All right, so this one is an f, so obviously I can't solve it, but I can rewrite it just like I talked about here. The bottom number comes out as part of the root, and then the top number stays there. I didn't have to write 1 here because 8 to the power of 1 is just 8, but if you've got a number other than 1, you need to write it there. Now, if you wrote this, that would also be correct. So both of these mean the same thing, and I'm a bit worried that my favourite pen is running out. That's a bit sad. All right, so when we have brackets, this 2 on the outside goes on both parts of this. So make sure that you put the 2 on the 4 and on the 3. So 4 squared is 16. And then C, remember when we have brackets like this, we're multiplying, not adding like we were up here. So 3 times 2 is 6. All right, for this next one, I need to put this cubed on everything before I can deal with this 3 out here. So I'm going to leave it, and then I'm going to put cubed on everything. So 2 cubed is 8, and this f becomes 15, and the r becomes 21. So then all I'm doing is multiplying 3 by 8, because this 3 can't do anything to those. So 24, f to the power of 15, r to the power of 21, and I can feel my favorite pen running out. All right, I'm going to do the same thing I did before with this and rewrite it as a fraction first. So 30m squared j to the power of 8 all over 25m to the power of 11 j. And again, I'm going to say, what can I divide both of these things by? Well, I can divide them both by 5, so I end up with 6 on the top and 5 on the bottom. And then my m's I'm going to look at. So 2 minus 11 is -9. So -9 means that it belongs down the bottom as a positive. And then 8 minus 1 should be j to the power of 7. All right, same thing. I'm going to rewrite this. X to the power of -3, y to the power of 5, z -1, all over 3, x to the power of 4, y cubed z to the power of negative 4. Okay, well, this is just getting sad. And now we're writing in pink. Okay, so same thing. You can do this in multiple steps. So there are two different ways that you can do it. I'm going to do this with a step in the middle, just because you're less likely to make mistakes the more steps you include. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do all my subtractions and not move them until a third step if they're negative, because there's quite a few things to move around for this. So I'm still going to do 6 divided by 3. Well, that 6 divided by 3 is just 2, so there's no number left on the bottom. Then I'm going to say negative 3 minus 4, so that should be x to the power of negative 7. And then I've got 5 minus 3, which is just 2, and negative 1 minus negative 4. So remember, if you've got minus negative 4, that's going to become a plus. So it's negative 1 plus 4, which actually gives me a cubed. Now the only thing that's got a negative power is this x, so that actually belongs on the bottom of my fraction. So then that would be my final answer. Good. All right, I hope we all got that. Let's move on to the next page, if I can turn it. All right. So same thing here. The first thing I'm going to do, this one is probably the trickiest question because there's so much going on. But what I'm going to do first is rewrite it a bit. So first of all, I'm going to start by putting this 2 on everything here. So I'm going to leave that there and the squared. So this becomes 16 d to the power of 6, e to the power of 8, and f squared. Now, I am not going to divide this. I'm actually going to change it into a multiplication because this negative 2 as a power tells me, but this whole bracket is in the wrong place. So instead of writing it on the bottom of a fraction, I'm just going to multiply it here instead because it belongs on the top of the fraction, right? So now I have negative 6d to the power of negative 1, e to the power of 8, f to the power of negative 5, and that is squared. So this negative power has become positive and we've put it on top of the fraction. So now I'm going to start expanding things. So let's start with this. So that becomes 32d to the power of 6, e to the power of 8, f squared, times, now I'm going to square all of this. So negative 6 squared is 36. Then I'm multiplying these things. So then I get d to the power of negative 2, e to the power of 16, and f to the power of negative 10. So now I have some things that I can put on the bottom of my fraction. So let's say what that can equal over here, shall we? Okay, so 36 times 32 is 1,152. Then I'm going to count my d's. So I've got d6 and negative 2. So I'm adding those together. So I end up with d to the power of 4. And then my e's, I've got 8 plus 16. So e is to the power of 24. And then I've got 2 and negative 10. So that's negative 8. So f to the power of negative 8 means that f should be on the bottom of my fraction. So this one was probably the most complicated just because there were so many things that could go wrong in this one. So if you made a mistake, don't worry too much. Yeah, the longer the question, the more chances there are for mistakes. Okay, so we're back to fractional powers here. So remember, the bottom of our fraction is actually the thing that belongs outside the root sign. So this is the 5th root of 32, and hopefully you know that that's 2. So it's really good to know all the 2. So you've got 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, which is what we just had. And if you can just keep counting up, so 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, all of these things, if you know those, 2048, if you've played any of, there's a few games that use this scaling up exponential sequence. So maybe you've memorized some of those numbers from games that you've played. Also, computing language works like this. So if you do computer programming at school in any of your classes, then you may know some of these numbers off the top of your head, but it's probably good to learn them if you don't know them. All right, this one I think people may have found a little bit trickier. Again, we're going to pull out the 4. This is 81, and I'm actually going to leave it like this and do that instead of putting it in here, just because that's going to make our lives a bit simpler. So the 4th root of 81, I know that that's 3, Now, if you don't know that that's 3, there are ways that you can check. You can just do some counting. So when we count it up with the 2s, you never get to 81, you pass it, so that doesn't work. So you could try counting 3s. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 is 81. So actually what this is saying is it's 3 cubed. Same with like 4. So you should know the first few of each of these. It's really helpful. So if you start with 4, you got 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. So if you know some of these off the top of your head, it'll make life easier. 5 times 5 is 25, times 5 is 125. Knowing the first few in each sequence will save you some time. So then 3 cubed, here's just 27. All right, same thing here. So this is going to be the square root of 4 cubed. So the square root of 4 is 2. 2 cubed is 8. So yeah, this is an easier way to do it if you think of it like this. Instead of cubing 4, which is 64, you can do it like that. So if you wanted to cube 4, you could say it's the square root of 64, and the square root of 64 is 8. See how you get the same answer either way? I don't mind which way you do it, but this way seems a little bit easier, especially for something like this when you've got really big numbers. Because if you want to cube 81, it's going to be massive, and then take the 4th root of that. That's going to be crazy, and that's a bit harder to manage, especially because they ask you to do this without a calculator.